Hey, what's up, everyone? Another episode of the NewOrleans.Football podcast. We got a good show for you guys today. We're going to talk about the optics of the draft pick that the team traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. Who has a worse quarterback situation than the Saints? Or maybe the better way to look at that is where do they rank in the league in terms of quarterback situation? And what should the plan be moving forward out of this season? And also, is the season actually officially, finally on the brink, or is the zombie NFC South keeping everybody alive? We're going to get into all of that stuff and much more. And as always, we are coming to you from the Better Call BADEAUX podcast studio. So if you need legal help with any of the following: car wrecks, offshore injuries, 18-wheeler collisions, Maritime Jones Act, hurricane and storm claims, you better call BADEAUX at 504-323-7777 or 985-303-7777 for your free consultation and case review, BADEAUXlaw.com. And check out our guys, Firehouse Subs, Veteran Boulevard's locations. Great people who do great things for the community. And remember, we have an upcoming event coming there in December, so stay tuned for details. We will be sharing those soon. Let's go. All right, so the Saints got the Steelers this week, and as always, if you guys are listening to the show, make sure you're supporting NewOrleans.Football. It's the best way to help us out, support the show. Sign up, $9 a month, $89 a year. You get a bonus podcast every week, all of our analysis and everything else. So if you're listening and you have not done that yet, fix it. And if you sign up right now, you're kind of a real one because the season isn't going perfect.
I mean, we've gotten millions of these, but I got the, why would I pay for this when I already know what it says? The Saints suck. Their coaching is terrible. Their medical staff sucks and they're not going to win. And I'm like, huh. It made me wonder, do you ever go around and tell people why you're not buying? Like, do you walk into a restaurant? I wanted a burger anyway. You guys sell pasta.
And look, we're saying a lot more than that. There's still a lot of interesting stuff going on. We got a story going up today, a breakdown of buy time, Marcus Davenport's pressures, and why it's different or how it's different from previous years. So there's still a lot of stuff to dissect.
A lot to dissect.
Yeah, and this is about to get really interesting. How do you feel about this week? You wrote the story today that you feel like the season is finally officially on the brink.
Yeah, the Ravens game did not crush my spirits and my hopes for the 2022 Saints. The injury report did.
Yeah.
I know we've been talking about injuries all year, but we've been talking about them in the sense of, man, if this team had only had a healthy Jameis Winston and Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry and Marshawn Lattimore, they would have won more games. But we also kept saying, so we think this team will be good in the second half of the season when they're finally somewhat healthy. And now you're taking Pete Werner and Eric McCoy away too. I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah. It's like I don't care who you blame.
Andy Andrews, Pete.
Is it injuries or is it coaching? Like, forget that discussion. I want to see what this team looks like, and we've never gotten to see what this team looks like. And now they're going into. It's a joke, and some people like kind of called me on it, which is, oh, this is the last stand until next week's the last stand against the Rams, and that is true because they're probably only going to be one game out of first all season long because the NFC South is so terrible. But they can't lose at Pittsburgh, in my mind, because Pittsburgh's a train wreck. And Pittsburgh's probably going to look pretty good in this game because they're healthy and they're coming off a bye. But they've got probably, we're going to talk about quarterback situations. They probably got the worst quarterback in the NFL right now. They probably got the worst offensive line in the NFL, one of the worst run games. They're bottom 5 in offensive yards, bottom 5 in defensive yards. And if you limp into this game and you can't beat them because your team's not good enough to beat Pittsburgh, yeah, maybe you'll be better down the road and you'll beat better teams, but you're always going to be like, how did we not get the Pittsburgh free space on this card this year?
Yeah, look, the funny thing, though, is that Seattle could beat the Bucs before the Saints ever even take the field. I believe they're in Germany, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to play in the morning. Atlanta just lost, so it might just be the same exact situation over again.
We'll talk about it again. Yeah,
it's such a zombie division, and it's not like anybody's winning it. They're all just existing because nobody will shoot anybody. Like, somebody just needs to kill somebody and just move on with the plot. It's like The Walking Dead right now, where it's just like, location to location to location to location to like, all right, I'm shutting this off. Like, I'm not doing this
Walking
anymore.
Dead is such a good comparison because I was like into that show for a while and I was just kind of like season 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 are all the same. That is what the Saints season feels like.
Like
right
somebody
now.
needs to kill the sheriff. Like let's get something going on here. And that's just really how it felt. And I did eventually shut that off. And I kind of really wanted to shut off Thursday Night Football last night because it was so ugly. And that's just where they're at. But it's weird because I agree with you fully that I kind of feel like if you can't beat Pittsburgh, like what are you doing here? But again, like nobody can beat anybody. So I don't know where they're kind of I think it is going to be an extremely tough game for them. The interior offensive line being what it is, likely shift in Cesar Ruiz. Now you got two different guards in there. You got to run the ball to be a good team with the way they want to operate. I don't know how they're going to be able to run the ball. Pittsburgh's very susceptible to deep plays. I don't know if you can get the ball down the field because you might not be able to block in the middle. Watt's coming back. I think the only other time that Ramczyk played him, he kind of blanked him a little bit, but that's going to be a really tough matchup. So if they can't protect this week, and then the way Andy Dalton handled it last week, he seemed scared just knowing that they could get to him, even when they weren't getting to him. If that's the same thing here, it could be a really, really difficult game for him.
No, and look, it's kind of futile to look at the schedule, and I'm not definitely saying the season's over if they can't beat Pittsburgh, but it's there's tougher games to come, and we just saw what they looked like against Baltimore. So when they're going to have to, the one thing they're going to have to do is exploit every opportunity they have to win a game for the rest of the year because they've blown too many of them already.
Yeah, it's kind of like if they lose this game, it's almost just creates a sense of like, is this worth it? And what's going on here? More so than anything else.
No, there's no alternative reality. They should keep trying to win. I mean, there's no bench the starter and bring in the rookie. I mean, there might be a bench Andy Dalton and put in Jameis Winston because he might save this season and you need to know what he looks for next season. But it's not like there's a time where they're like, all right, we'll tell DeMario and Alvin and Cam and Ryan Ramczyk to take the rest of the year off. They're going to keep trying all season long, so it doesn't change your approach or your strategy.
Well, because there's nothing to change it for.
There's nothing to change it to, but it does. There's something to me that feels like a real delineation point this week. It really does.
The thing that stinks about like them not having that first round pick is I feel like this is maybe the game where you get to the point where you're like, all right, if we lose this, what are we doing here? Like, do we keep pushing forward? What's the point of it? This is probably something that's not realistic, but I think even then at that point, you start looking at some of these legal cases you have and you say, hey man, like what would it take for you to settle this? Like get the suspension over with.
Can you please get suspended this year?
Yeah, because now Alvin's getting suspended next year probably, and Marcus May's probably getting suspended next year. And that might be the reality anyhow. There might not actually be a situation where these cases can be settled and you can do anything else. But I think you would at least be like, hey, like, is there any way to speed this up? Like, what can you do? And that's a conversation now, but that doesn't exist. So now they're picking in the second round. And me and you have been kind of talking about this all week behind the scenes. I think that it's kind of at a point where if they don't make the playoffs, the conversation we've been having is that, oh, you got to save this. You got to try to not give them a good pick.
Yeah.
In my mind, the pick's gone. In my mind, the trade is already bad. I think it's a bad trade. They are not what they thought they wanted to be. And I think there's a difference between being a good team, missing out on the playoffs and picking 12th, and being a team that's 6th in the draft order right now and winning your way to 12. And I kind of feel like with them needing talent, they don't need to, but I think it would be better if they picked higher in the second round. I think if you have picked 37 or 38, it's better than having pick 44. And
sure,
I don't know if it makes a significant difference, but I think the idea of optics and practicality is kind of a cook point. I understand that feelings would feel a certain way. I understand if you're Mickey Loomis, it probably, or Jeff Ireland or anybody in that front office who was part of that trade, it's part of your resume at a certain point. It becomes the worst
legacy.
thing.
It's your legacy. I mean, this is like, I feel like we could spend the whole pod today, like just almost like reading our texts,
arguing semantics,
or like we should start recording what, the conversations we have on the sideline. This is one we were having yesterday. Is yes, of course, the computer agrees they should have the 33rd pick in the draft this year. That should, if they're going to miss the playoffs, they should want the 33rd pick in the draft. Of course. But no, like to me, like Mickey Loomis's legacy, if they give the 5th pick in next year's draft to Philadelphia, is won a Super Bowl, hired Sean Payton, signed Drew Brees, traded away the 5th pick in the draft. Like it's in the first paragraph as the worst thing he ever did. And everybody involved. I mean, I think it has to be a double-digit pick to save face. And I know saving face doesn't help you in 2024, but you also care about your reputation and your legacy. The miscalculation that would go into trading away next year's first-round pick and then having it be
See,
a top 5 pick is the kind of thing that that stains your resume as much as winning a championship boosts your resume. I really think so.
I just think whatever you think about that trade should already be set right now because they are not a contender.
I usually feel that way about the salary cap, so I know what you're saying.
They are not a good team right now.
Yeah.
They are not the team they thought they were going to be. Everything they thought they were going to do, and the reason for making those trades has not worked. And I feel like you're already in the position. So it's kind of like a sunken cost fallacy right now. It's like you're trying to dig your way out of something that you've already lost. Like, and I feel like that pick's bad if they make the playoffs. The pick ain't helping you this year. Trevor Penning's hurt. Just nothing about it is his work. So it's just what makes my feelings feel better about this. And like, I don't think none of that actually matters. And I get it. I understand the point of view. I understand the optics. I think it's really bad for whoever made the decision, Mickey, Dennis, Jeff, whoever, all of them. Let's just lump them all in there. Like, I think it's bad for all of them. But I do think also, this might be the worst thing Mickey ever does. But if he sticks around for 10 more years and has a lot more success, it becomes, something that kind of fades away a little bit and gets lost in it. Like Howie Roseman had missteps and now he's a hero. So, I mean, I think there's ways around it.
People would remember it. Remember if the Eagles win the Super Bowl and then get the 5th pick in the draft, people will always remember who gave it to them.
No question. But I think that looks stupid already. I think it just looks stupid already. It doesn't matter if it's 5th or 12th. I think it's a horrible trade.
It became a horrible trade because of the risk that we're discussing. But if they get away with it and it's the 15th pick in the next year's draft, they traded next year's 15 for what they thought was the 15th best player in this year's draft. Cool.
The only way to save face for me is you have to make the playoffs. Like, I don't think it's a thing where you get on the cusp of the playoffs and miss. That's horrible. And there's too many quarterbacks in this draft. That should have been part of your calculation. Like, oh, there's 5 guys that could potentially be someone who could be a starter in the league. What do we do here? Like, is this the time to do it? And they made the decision to go like, it was just a massive miscalculation.
Massive.
You didn't have the quarterback on the roster. And if you battle your way to a couple wins, and you're just spiting yourself in a certain sense, because if you're picking 37th, 38th in the second round, and there's enough quarterbacks here, if like next year's Kenny Pickett Pickett might not be a perfect example. He might not be a long-term great starter, but if somebody you view as like, he could be, and there were people with the Saints that liked him. I think if there wasn't a coaching change, maybe their approach in the draft is different towards quarterback even. But if that guy falls a little bit and you're at 38, they don't have a second round pick next year, but you have better ammunition to get in than if you're dangling pick 47, 48. I mean, it's just practically.
I don't, if for some reason you were locked into draft picks for like multiple years, I still don't hate that they traded next year's 18th pick for this year's 18th pick. I'll give them a pass on that. But the lesson learned from this, that should have already been known, and we discussed it at the time, but didn't think of the colossal bottom dropping out scenario, is never trade a future pick if there is any chance that pick could turn into
a quarterback. If you don't have the quarterback,
if you don't have a quarterback. I mean, it really, and it's sucking the hope out of this season too. I mean, the Saints do care about the fan base. I'm not going to say the Saints don't care about the fan base, but the Saints they have to think about their team and not how people are going to react to it. But not having that pick as this year sucks, but at least, we're going to have a high draft pick next year. That's a killer. It's absolutely putting a drain on this season like nothing I ever remember before. Like, even when the Saints had those other 7 and 9 seasons, they at least had the 11th pick in the draft the next year. Having this season with no first round pick is a double whammy that this team hasn't experienced since 2005.
Yeah, there would at least still be an element of fun, and Saturdays become different.
Yeah, we'd start talking about college quarterbacks.
People will probably start getting excited about losses in a certain sense. Like, it'd be like, all right, well, they lost.
Carolina. Who would you rather be right now? Honestly, like, would you rather be the Saints or Carolina right now?
It's tough. I mean, I think I'd rather be the Saints still. I think
special players.
Yeah, I think they got a handful of guys that are still good. But just last thing on the optics of the pick for me is like, It's just really a thing. It isn't spin or anything like that. Like, I just think it's a bad trade period, and I don't think there's any way to change. I don't think there's any way to change it. And it's not like, well, oh, well, now it feels less bad, but then reality, you're in a crappier draft position.
I don't know. You ever make like the wrong turn down the one way or something like that, and you're like, oh my god, I'm the biggest idiot in the world. I could have been killed, but you're like, but I got away with it. Phew. That's how they'll feel.
But I don't think they are getting away with it though. I think you're still catching a ticket no matter what, because they aren't in range to do anything. So I mean, the pick's gone. You aren't what you thought you were going to be. I think it's just a bad deal. Period. Not oh, it's a little less bad. No, it's bad. And the actual less bad thing here is having a better pick in every other round in the draft.
I'll tell you who more than Mickey Loomis, more than Kai Harley, more than Jeff Ireland, everybody involved, Dennis Allen, Trevor Penning is rooting for this team.
Oh man,
he does not want to be compared to the top 3 quarterbacks in next year's draft for the rest of his career. He won't be able to live. He'll have to go into witness protection, which is going to be really tough when you're as big as that dude is.
Speaking of the rookies, do you think Olave has a shot at rookie of the year? Is he even in the?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's in it, but how real do you think it is?
It's him. Well, Kenneth Walker, I think, of Seattle.
I think Walker's already won it. Like, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, he would have to tail off or whatever. I mean, Olave would probably have to finish with more yards and more touchdowns or something like that, because in the end, people will look at the two. But he's in it for sure. Yeah.
I think Seattle winning games. Walker, I think, already has 7 touchdowns.
The Saints beat Seattle. Thank you very much.
Olave only has 2. I mean, he's on pace for like 1,204 touchdowns. Like, I think he would need to probably get like 10 touchdowns just at the pace
Walker's ruining it for him. No quarterback is ruining it for him. It'd be like him versus like Dameon Pierce. Others. But I'll tell you what, he's by far and away the leading contender among the rookie receivers.
Oh, no question.
And we talked about this being like a historic rookie receiver class. And was he the 3rd or 4th one taken? It was Drake London, Jamison Williams, Olave?
He was 3rd.
Who's the other one we're forgetting? When was Garrett Wilson taken?
He was taken ahead of him. Yeah.
So Jamison Williams was after.
That was after, yeah. No, that was the thing. Yeah, the Saints traded ahead, and then Detroit had that video where they were celebrating them going up getting the Olave.
But that video's going to haunt him. He's winning that race right now. And you know, that's one thing when we're talking about perception, and the Saints wanted 2 first-round picks in this year's draft class. Well, they nailed one of them. And it's still possible they nailed both of them. There, time could tell, if Penning just has Ryan Ramczak's career, history will look favorably on what they did by investing in this year's draft class. But it just takes all the wind out of your sails when if we're spending all of December looking ahead to next year, and next year doesn't include a first round pick.
So DJ's been in the Twitter streets, on the timeline, all that stuff. Where do you fall on it, on the draft pick? Do you want them picking higher in the second if they miss the playoffs, or do you feel like there's a level of optics here that makes a difference on how this is all perceived?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I'd rather the second round pick. I'd rather the higher second round pick. Like, the trade is bad. It's done. You your swing at that. Like, say somebody does slide, like how Pickett did at the 17th pick or something like that. Like, you give yourself that swing, like you having that higher pick, having a pick in the 30s rather than 40s, 48, 47. So I'm with, like, the season is it is what it is. So give me the higher pick in the second round, and then hopefully, Sean gets you something back, and now you got ammo to go get a guy.
All right,
but we weren't talking about what the fans want. Of course, the fans want the 33rd pick. I'm saying the Saints.
No, I think the
Saints can't want the 33rd pick.
I think the fan topic has been that they got to make sure the thing to play for the season, the rallying point is making sure Philadelphia.
If I'm a fan, I don't care whose feelings get hurt. Give me the higher pick.
Yeah, I think that's. I was saying
topic. From a Saints perspective, the Saints are sweating this one out. They're sweating this one out.
No, it hurts. I think the pain is immense if the pick is higher, and I think that's the fans and everything. That's the fan talk.
The fans. Well, here's the fan talk: is they want the Saints to suffer right now. The fans I see on Twitter are like, they just want nothing but pain. And
they were
embarrassed. Like they're so anti-Saints right now that they like want to watch it crash and burn.
They were back immediately after the Raiders win. If they have a good win this week, everybody's back in it. You walk over to Magazine Street, that dog has a huge sign on the front that says "Dat Swagger is back, go Saints." Like, people were back in immediately after that Raiders game. They're looking for any sign of hope right now. I don't think anybody truthfully wants them to crash and burn it.
No,
and I think there's still kind of
you can't get rid of that hope. Look, I mean, even if they had a first-round pick, the people would be in conflict if they had a first-round pick. You still root for your team. I mean, and the fact that the division is what it is, and that 7 and 10 could win this division, I think it'll take a long time before the fans are actively rooting for them to lose a game. I don't think we're anywhere close to that.
If they
yet.
had that first round pick, I would honestly be on here every week talking about, hey, it's kind of better if they lose. Like, it's kind of better if they lose. Okay, all right. Pete Werner's hurt. Hopefully it's not career altering, and I know it's not. Like, okay, is that the worst thing? Like, these are the kind of the conversations that's how everything would get framed right now. Well, all right, well, maybe they lose a winnable game to Pittsburgh because of the injuries. Is that the worst thing? I mean,
but we obviously have a good friend who covers the Colts, Joel Erickson, so I've been following their coverage quite a bit. And there is a team that is just heading in a completely different direction. But one direction they're heading is, well, at least all of this is leading toward us maybe finally getting a quarterback after we've tried 4 different guys in 4 years. And at least he gives you somewhere to direct your faith.
Which media member would you hire to coach the Saints? If since the Colts just hired a guy off of the ESPN set.
Well, Deuce is a friend of the podcast.
You go Deuce?
No, it's got to be. Let's see, since we, it's got to be somebody who's a rah-rah guy who talks about toughness, because it's got to be the anti-Dennis Allen, who's too mild-mannered. So who's Bobby? You
go Bobby? I think I'm going with your first guy, Deuce. If we're going outside of the WWL booth, I don't really know where I go with it at that point.
Jari Evans, he came in. He was a coaching intern,
but he's not in the media. So I mean, you kind of got your only qualification is to be that you're talking on a media set.
Vilma would be popular.
Vilma would be a good pick.
Fans would rally around that.
Yeah.
Well, Drew. How about Drew?
You go Breeze? Is Breeze still a media member? Kinda.
All right, let's actually answer. If you had to hire a former Saint to coach his team because you're actually trying to win, who do we got?
I go Zach Strief.
Zach Strief?
Yeah. That's
not
that's not on the Jeff Saturday scale.
But look, Zach Strief is one of the most. Here's the reason why he won media awards, became a media member, and we still talk to him all the time as a coach. He's incredibly reasonable. He understands everything. He understands what the fans are talking about, and he understands what the team actually needs. And he's not screaming and yelling guy. He's a reasonable guy. He's basically representative of this entire current coaching staff that everybody is so out on.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think he's really good at what he does. I think just cycling down other guys that I've covered, the next two that immediately come to mind, I think Malcolm Jenkins was probably one of the smartest guys I was ever
around. Well, there you go. Former player. He's not quite in the media, but he dabbles around. I think if you were going to do a radical Jeff Saturday type hire, I think that's the first name we've said where people would be like, I'm a little intrigued.
Yeah. And then my other one would probably be Tehran. I think he's incredibly smart. And then you see him at like the O-line masterminds. He's kind of the guy that's teaching everybody there after Duke Manyweather. And Brandon Thorne's also a coach there as well, or a scout there. But yeah, I mean, he's someone in all those videos that everybody's kind of coming to. He's showing them their technique. So I think there's some natural leadership there. But if you're just hiring somebody straight off of like their personality and the buy-in, I think Malcolm's the number one guy on that list.
Well, this also just drove home the point. Those are two guys they just lost in this locker room this year, and that has to hurt immensely. Two guys that we're saying could be head coaches in the NFL, in theory, were taken from the locker room. There's a
significant void there. I mean, just us being in the media, times like these, you're kind of looking around and you're like, who all right, who's the pulse of the team guy?
That became a big Kamara story. Kamara realized it should be him, and it is.
Who's the team spokesman? Who are the guys that I can go talk to about global issues on the team? And there is Alvin right now. And I look around. Cam's definitely a guy. And
DeMario to an extent, although he's been a little disconnected with like not wanting to do this through the media this year, I think.
Yeah, which is his prerogative.
He's a little over the figured out in press conferences, and he's a little more figured out internally guy.
Yeah. I don't know if that reflects his standing with the team. I don't think is changed or anything.
But I mean, he's still leading the pregame. Yeah. I'm saying he needs to be mentioned. He's one of those guys who I guarantee is delivering this message in the locker room.
There used to be 5 or 6 of these guys that I think were just in the locker room or around that were just kind of like, the pillars.
Including the quarterback, of course.
Yeah.
And look, Andy Dalton's great to talk to right now, but he still feels like a guy who is playing for somebody else's team. He doesn't feel like it's his team yet. How could it be?
Like if you're a guy in the secondary, like who is who's the guy right now? I don't know who it is. I don't know
Yeah.
who that person is supposed to be. And
Especially
they've
with
always,
Marshawn missing all this time and Tyrann Mathieu being a new guy. I mean, that stuff matters, and that
it does.
it's evident, like you say, when we are in the locker room being like, who do we need to talk to about the fact that you've just lost 3 of 4 games, and what's the message, and what are you banking on? Who do you go talk to? And it's a small list of people who have their finger on the pulse of the team.
Is this the last Stanford Dalton this week? I wrote that it was, so I'm on paper saying what I kind of feel.
Yeah, I think so. I think so because for 2 reasons. Performance, I think if you're just fairly judging it on performance, it would be 4 losses in 5 games, which is it doesn't even feel that way. It's hard to believe that they would be on the verge of 4 losses in 5 games because it felt like they were like doing something positive recently. But that would be the only win in a 5-game stretch, being that Raiders win. So performance, if he plays bad. I mean, if he plays well and he's not the reason they lose, then maybe you don't bench him. He has to play poorly in a loss, or play poorly in a win almost. But 2, I know this is something we've disagreed on. I also think there's a deserve element with Jameis Winston that as soon as the door is open, Jameis Winston should only be held off if he's clearly being outplayed. If it's even a tie, if it's like, well, I mean, they're both on the same level, then Jameis deserves a chance at some point to be like, well, maybe I could do better than that.
I think if it's a tie and you're doing okay and you feel like there's continuity to be had, I think you keep.
Then it's not a tie.
Dalton.
If you're doing okay and there's continuity, then it's not a tie.
That's fair. Yeah. So things are going.
If you're losing and things are like if another game looks like the Baltimore game, there is, you might as well cut Jameis Winston if you're going to walk into the locker room and tell him, nope, still not your turn.
Yeah, I think if Dalton, you reach a point where you feel you can no longer win games with Dalton, you absolutely go back to Jameis. I actually kind of feel like this with the offensive line issues, like someone that can protect themselves a little bit, like this wouldn't be a bad game to have Jameis on the field for, because I feel like if they're bringing their rush and you need a guy to kind of climb the pocket.
If he has his mobility again, like if he's moving well again,
this would actually kind of be one to consider. There's also door number 3. The fans are
Speaking
all
of,
the fans
here's
are all
a text conversation. This is what it's like to be Mike and Nick. Nick, what morning did you text me? And you're like, I've been thinking about it all day.
I mean, is there ever a scenario where you look at Taysom?
This is another sunk cost conversation. I would be so mad if they turned to Taysom, only because I'm like, man, if you guys really believe that a Taysom offense can work, then why don't you do it from March? Why don't you build the playbook around it? Why don't you let him practice all off season with his teammates? Why don't you really do it? Because if they put Taysom in now, we'd be seeing it with a 70% chance to work. I'm fascinated to see it. I still feel like we got so cheated that they didn't do it the right way when Sean Payton finally had his chance to coach with Taysom for a while. And to see the 70% version of it would almost frustrate me. I'd be like, why didn't you really do this and let him practice quarterback and let him play quarterback? Why are we just throwing him in there when it doesn't really have a chance to work? So, but the one thing I definitely agree on is there is a section of the playbook that could be as many as 30 snaps, 20 snaps every single time it's 3rd and 3 or shorter. I'd do that right now. We said, why does he only get 2 touches? Why doesn't he get 22 touches?
Yeah. Look, I wanted to be extremely clear that I'm going Jameis before Taysom. If Andy falters, I'm going to Jameis. Jameis needs to show what he can do. I think that's where you go. I do think it's interesting, though, and I was listening to, I saw a clip on YouTube. Mike Florio and Sims were talking about Taysom, and they kind of pointed out they felt like maybe there was too much of a rush for Dennis Allen to be like, whoa, like we aren't doing this with Taysom. Like this was Sean's thing. This is my thing. And this is the first change I'm going to make. And then Taysom kind of finds out sporadically. And maybe there was too much of this isn't what he's going to be. And I think I kind of maybe agree with that a little bit. I think it was maybe too far one way. And then he kind of corrected the narrative at a certain point and be like, whoa, I didn't say it was going to be that different. You did say it was going to be that different. And then you kind of walked it back a little bit. But it is interesting in that sense. I do think, though, that if people want to make an argument that so-and-so didn't get the shot and they weren't healthy and this or that, the same things are true for Taysom, though. Like nobody ever says like hey, this guy played with mallet finger last
Yeah.
year. Nobody ever says, whoa, maybe we didn't get to see him at his best. It was just kind of like, he can't do this and move on. And I do think that that's probably true to some extent, that the way they were operating offense, like he showed how far he could go with it and it wasn't far enough. But you're also in a situation right now with quarterbacks where you aren't far enough either. So I don't think that they've raised the bar far enough to be completely at a point where it's like, this guy shouldn't ever play. And I agree with you though. I think the biggest shortcoming of Sean all those years, all these ideas of Taysom, all this, like, what can he do? What can he be? It wasn't enough. They went like a certain distance with it. But I think even just like the structure of your passing offense needed to change, like fundamentally, to like just a simpler passing offense, everything kind of built off of movement. And it was kind of like, here's the movement,
and
here's
way
the passing offense.
more design runs,
yeah.
and way more it's
Yeah.
okay to run. That's why you're in there. But
Or just even stuff where it's just kind of like, all right, get out of the pocket and do this and extend the play and go, or here's some easy
instead,
concepts
every time
here.
a play extended, it was a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
the things that he was supposed to be good at, he wasn't good at. So,
all right, but let's, because we just spent way too much time.
Hey, boy, you want to talk about pressure coming, like them coming up the middle, like that was the one thing. And I couldn't believe it.
I mean, the whole theory of Taysom was supposed to be, and first of all, he completed like 72% of his passes when he threw to like Sean Payton drew up a play. Michael Thomas is open. You just hit Michael Thomas. Boom.
Yeah.
If that's not open, run.
Yeah.
And instead, he would be in the pocket for 6 seconds and a sack fumble. And anyway, let's talk about Jameis real quick. If they went to Jameis as early as next week, do you want Jameis to fit this current offense and say, Jameis, throw it to Alvin, throw it to, or do you switch the offense to, something that works better for Jameis?
Yeah. The one thing I disagree with.
And I guess that's my question is either scenario better than what we've seen?
The one thing I disagree with, I don't think the offense was ever that much different. There were a handful of called shot plays, I think. But then there's also like, I'm throwing deep here. Whereas someone else might say, oh, I'm taking the check down here, or I'm taking the intermediate here. So that's on the quarterback as well. So if you're saying, like, am I coaching him into the theory of, like I said last week, like, I think someone needs to be like, if he's going deep instead of throwing to Alvin, like, I want to see like Pete, like, foaming in his mouth, like Mike Thomas did after that touchdown, like just completely, like in his face going crazy. So yeah, I think you need to coach him into that. But I also don't think you take away the deep ball. I think you have to be smart about it. I think I'm getting Rashid Shaheed down the field a handful of times every game. But the idea that, I think there's this narrative that it was just like, oh, well, they were telling Jameis to air it out every single play and he wasn't allowed to throw it short. No, that isn't what was going on. And I don't even think he was airing it out that much. I think he was trying
just in that one game.
Yeah, the one game where he went deep 7 times. And I do think that was partly play calling as well in that one.
Yeah.
So I will concede on that. But in every other game, no, I don't think it was that drastically different. They're calling their plays. There's a handful of things. Well, Taste or Andy does this or Jameis does this, and we'll cater to it a little bit. But I don't think it's like there's the Jameis offense and the Andy offense. It's just the approach.
No, but I guess my question more was, I feel like I only brought this up because I feel like to make Taysom work, it needed to be different.
Oh yeah, no,
but
torn down, and
we are so conditioned to know that the Saints offense has worked for years with Drew Brees and even with Teddy Bridgewater, and especially late career Drew Brees, by being complete 70+% of your passes, throw to the running backs first and foremost, throw a lot of slants. What I'm saying is that the formula that could work? Is there a scenario where Jameis wins 4 of the last 5 games because he figures out, hey, I'm going to throw to Alvin Kamara a lot more? Or is it stop trying to fit a round peg into a square hole? Which one is it? Is it no, Jameis, this is a good offense, fit in this offense? Or is it, all right, we got to scrap the fundamentals of what we think makes good offense? Because there's other quarterbacks around the NFL, not in New Orleans, who don't throw to their running backs. Pat Mahomes doesn't throw to his running backs. You know what I mean? Like, is that the problem, that they're trying to make Jameis be something is not, or that Jameis isn't recognizing the value of throwing those passes?
It's tough because he talked the whole offseason about talking about the value of those passes, and then he kind of got into the season and he got hurt so quickly that I don't know that we saw any.
Josh Allen doesn't throw to his running backs either. I should have said.
I don't know that we see him in a situation where that was able to manifest. So I don't know what kind of growth he's made in that sense. But I think for the reason we thought the Saints could be a good team is because we heard Jameis talking about these things. He's talking about his short accuracy. We saw it actually in training camp, like him doing some of this stuff. Like there weren't a lot of highlight plays in camp, like as far as like the deep stuff. It was mostly more rhythm-based offense. So I think for him to be the best version of himself, he needs to be that. I think they need to get him in situations where they're kind of almost forcing it to happen. He's got to do it himself. And I think, as we heard him say it, I think he'd want to, embrace all that stuff as
the
well.
Best of both worlds scenario is the right answer here. It'd be awesome if he could do both.
Yeah. And the explosiveness still needs to be there. And I think the explosiveness opens up the shorter stuff. So you got to find the right combination of it. The idea of him being able to do it all, like I said, is the thing that we embraced. Can it actually happen? At this point, I've seen enough go wrong this year that I'm just everybody's got to prove everything to me at this point.
Yeah.
I'm not making proclamations for anybody anymore at this point.
Exactly. No, agree.
What else we got?
What else we got for our? You got a smile.
We had the QB conversation.
Yeah.
Who, the Saints are in a position. Obviously, they got to go into next year. They need somebody. They're going to look. I think the guys on their roster right now, they're going to look and see if there are other options. If, I don't think anybody's tied to anybody right now at this point. When you look around the league, though, and you're evaluating kind of who has more dire quarterback situation.
Wait, I got to pull up my phone.
Than the Saints.
Look this up.
Yeah. Where are you going with that? I'm going to throw out my first pick on this.
We're saying people who have a worse QB situation. All right, we got to put some parameters here real quick because we could be talking about Russell Wilson in Denver. We hate that situation.
Denver's my number one pick,
but because of how much they invested. So are we talking?
Well, and how he's playing.
Are we talking? Which quarterback would you rather have for the next 9 games? Cost, price, none of that matters. It's just like, can you win your next 9 games with this quarterback? Or are we talking about how much they have invested in the guy too, and things like that?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's a short game and the long game.
Then Denver's in a worse situation.
Denver's definitely, I think, in the worst situation. And I kind of feel like that's the one you look at when you think next year, okay, if they can go after a quarterback and they can get someone, they can change their fate. That's the one situation that you wouldn't probably want to be in right now. I do wonder if Aaron Rodgers kind of falls into that a little bit next year. I don't know if he's kind of in a situation where he just doesn't want to be there and it's affecting his play a little bit. I know their weapons are horrible, so that's kind of a thing. Some of the stuff we saw with the Saints defense this summer against the Packers makes more sense in context of what we're seeing right now. So some of that optimism, like there was an assumed level of confidence with the Packers, and they kind of aren't there right now. But Denver definitely, I think, is a team that's in just a completely awful situation.
That's worth talking about because that was the other direction the Saints could have gone, was like massively using up every last resource they have to acquire like an Aaron Rodgers or a Russell Wilson. And I actually think if you polled the team and the fan base, they're probably glad that that's not the situation they're in right now, because this is an older team. And we can talk about, we'll probably spend the next several months talking about whether or not it's time to rebuild. What would a rebuild look like? Should they keep trying to win? But if like you were completely out of resources because you've invested them all in Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, you'd really feel pretty rudderless right now, I think. Pretty directionless right now, I should say. So I guess that's a saving grace that the Saints at least can move on from their quarterbacks and move on to something else. But again, that'd be nicer if you knew that was going to be through the draft, because they're probably going to have to go for a veteran. But like actual, like the conversation then of who actually has like quarterbacks that you're less likely to win with. I mean, it's probably a pretty short list. I think Pittsburgh's one of them right now.
Yeah, Pittsburgh definitely.
I mean, Kenny Pickett is.
I'd rather have Pickett
not playing well. You'd rather have Pickett, and what is he going to be?
Yeah, there's some upside there, and if you're a team that's likely to miss the playoffs, and the Saints still might sneak in, but I just don't feel like that's like even an accomplishment at this point. Maybe I don't know. I'm not going to let my mind go there, but I would definitely rather have Pickett. He's younger. He has upside.
I'm putting Houston below.
You wouldn't rather have Pickett? Hold up. You wouldn't rather have Pickett than Andy Dalton?
I would rather have Pickett than Dalton and Winston, but I don't think Pickett is going to last.
Yeah, I mean, definitely possible.
But
these guys are temporary too. So I'd rather have temporary have
because
upside.
Pickett was only the 20th pick in the draft. Basically, it's like, would I rather have Pickett or Trevor Penning? You know, they should have taken Pickett instead of Penning probably. But yeah, I don't think Pickett's going to be the answer. I bet Pittsburgh is drafting a new guy in a couple years too. So
they might be, but I mean, they might not too. And you might end up with one of these guys that you can win with, you know, and you don't have the significant cash investment.
There'd be more hope for the future if this was at least like Pickett's seasoning year. Yeah, no question.
And you'd at least be able to just talk about things a little bit differently. At least there's like this idea of upside. You could at least highlight the things that are going well and people could feel good about it. It might not be a long-term answer, but I would rather look, Jameis has one more year left. Andy's on a 1-year deal right now. I would rather have even if it is a possibility of a short-term situation, I'd rather have my short-term situation.
Well, the cost would be right too.
Yeah,
the price would be right.
I'd rather have this like unknown upside that maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. But I mean, you kind of know what Jameis is going to be. You kind of know what Andy's going to be, and if you're looking, you know, I'd rather be looking at someone like Pickett.
Yeah, and I mean, you could say the same thing about Malik Willis and Desmond Ridder if you want to. The Saints could have had any one of those guys, but and here's the thing that when we talk about this in theory, should the Saints have more of those type of guys on their team? Like the Saints didn't have those guys 35th on their draft board and decide not to take them 20th. They must have been like 5th round grades, 4th round grades, 3rd round grades. Of course, the Saints are not going to, except for Lamar Jackson, which was the biggest misstep they made at that position. I guarantee you that the Saints weren't like, well, we had this guy 28th on our board and this guy 32nd on our board, so we went with Peyton Turner. They went with Peyton Turner because they didn't have a quarterback within 100 spots of him, I'm sure. Otherwise, they would have taken a quarterback there.
Yeah.
So they would have had to feel like they're really forcing it. So I don't think they believe in any of those guys. I mean, Davis Mills in Houston, I think that's a worse situation right now. Houston doesn't have their answer. Carolina does not have their answer. That's a worse situation. Indianapolis, Matt Ryan's probably better than both Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton, but they benched him for Sam Ehlinger. That's not a better situation right now. And that's their 5th quarterback in 4 years. So
they're so dumb though.
And then Washington's about equal, I'd say. The Wentz Heineke duo is probably pretty similar to what we're looking at here.
Those are all the teams I got on my list. You left me with no meat on the bone here. I can't think
I got one for you.
Oh, DJ.
Right, go ahead.
What about Seattle and the Giants?
Oh, Seattle's definitely in a better situation. I would love to have Geno.
Accidentally.
Would you
accidentally?
What do you pay Geno or like Daniel Jones? Like, I'll be scared to be in that situation where I'm stuck having to pay.
Daniel Jones is a great point. I don't want to
be scared to be in that situation.
Daniel Jones could be in the Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers. Like Daniel Jones for now is playing better than the Saints guys are playing, but I wouldn't want to pay him more than what the Saints are paying their guys.
I feel like Daniel Jones is going to end up in that Jimmy Garoppolo zone of where you could win with him and be viable with him.
But I don't want to pay for
around him.
I don't want to.
And you're going to end up paying him more than you
Kirk
should.
Cousins.
Yeah. Kirk's like a top 10 quarterback this year.
I know,
though.
but I don't want to pay what they're paying Kirk Cousins.
No, like he got paid way too much. Jimmy got paid way too much. Geno's tough, man. Paying him is going to be a really, really hard situation for them. He looks really good. He's really good in that system. I would probably, if I'm Seattle, I would probably be willing to pay him like that Jimmy Garoppolo level type of salary. But if I were another team, I don't know. I'd be skeptical.
Geno's interesting because I think the Saints kind of stumbled in. We talked to Mickey Loomis on the record when we had him on the pod, and I've never heard him really privately say this either, but I feel like they've kind of see a market inefficiency or an opportunity there where how cheap Jameis Winston and how cheap Andy Dalton are. Geno falls into that category. Like, I feel like you either trade for a Carson Wentz or a Matt Ryan and pay them $20 million, or a Jimmy Garoppolo, or you get to go way, way down here and not use any draft picks or barely any money on this class of quarterback that is not that far off from that class. And I think that class is going to be fascinating next year because now we're getting 6 more rookies into the league. So, but the question is, your hit rate is much, much lower. But Geno is sort of the inspiration for that approach at quarterback.
If you're going to play that market, you got to hit it though. You got to hit it. You got to hit it right. But I do.
But there's nothing lost if, like, I would do that except the season. But like the Colts, Phillip Rivers $20 million, trade for Carson Wentz and pay him a lot of money, blew that. trade for Matt Ryan and pay him a lot of money, blew that. Like, you can't do that. Like, I'd almost rather be like, let's try Teddy, let's try Jameis, let's try Dalton, let's try Geno Smith, let's try whoever that person is, until you draft the guy.
Yeah, until you get the actual, like, oh my God, free agent type player, the type trade that you want.
Give me the one that worked.
Well,
Because
I mean,
we just said Russell Wilson didn't.
Coming into the season, like, if Rodgers was available, like, that's a trade I would have made. I would have made that trade. I probably would have made the Russell trade too, and maybe you're wrong on it.
I would have made the Russell trade. It just would have backfired.
Yeah, and maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe in a different situation, it works a little bit better. But outside of that, yeah, I wouldn't play the middle tier. Like, the middle tier, you're just a middling team.
I would play it until what I'm saying is I would do that.
Well, I'm talking like the Wentz type trades. Right. Yeah, that's the middle tier. I consider the Geno the lower tier, and I would do it like
until I draft him.
And I don't know if it's worked out as well as it should, but if you are going to do that, I would probably do what the Saints did and get two of them. So you have two guys to look at, and if one doesn't work out, you got another, and you kind of
Pittsburgh did it with Trubisky Pickett. Atlanta did it with Mariota Ritter.
That's different, though. I mean, I would
but I'm saying that
if you're playing the free agent,
disagree with that approach.
I agree with that 100%. I'm saying if you're hitting the free agent market again next year, like, I'm probably doing like a Winston Dalton pairing again. So you got two of them,
or guys like that. I'm fascinated, and
guys like that.
I'm fascinated to go pencil to paper at some point when we really do fully give up on this season and try to project who the next Jameis, when Tampa Bay let him go, is, because simple math, musical chairs, Andy Dalton. Who's the next Jameis and Andy Dalton? They were a starter, and when their team decided to move on with a rookie and part ways with them, they become available. Teddy Bridgewater's in that group too. Geno Smith is in that group, even though we didn't even think of him as in that category because he hadn't been a starter for 8 years. I wonder who's out there. I mean, we know a couple of them from Carolina, Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold. I don't know if the Saints should look at that. But there's going to be some guys, and I'm curious if there's any that we get excited about.
We wouldn't have been excited about Geno, and we would have been wrong.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's tough to project it, but I mean, that's probably where they're going to exist, and they do need to exist. So they gotta get one of those guys even before the draft. Like, you have to sign one, and then if something else materializes, cool. Like, you can get someone in the draft too, but they got to get another player in here. So whoever that's going to be, they're going to be in that market. I don't think they're settled on either one of these guys. And look, honestly,
Jameis and Dalton have 8 weeks to still make a case to say they're the guy. It won't get people too excited.
Yeah, where we're at right now, I think it's probably very likely that they're looking again next offseason. And look, I think we might disagree on this a little bit. Like, I think that they could be a playoff team next year with the right quarterback. I think that there's still enough pieces here that if they get the right guy, I think that there's still a chance to look. They're in a bad division. They're in a bad conference. But I also think that there's still solid pieces on this roster that, given health, given some different variables, add a little bit to it. I think they could still be a playoff team. I don't think they're that far off.
Where we disagree, and this is going to be so many future podcast episodes or whatever it is, I'm going to have a hard time investing new short-term money in it. I don't have to blow it up. I don't have to get rid of anybody who's good on this current team necessarily. But I'm going to have trouble signing two more veterans that cost $10, $12 million. And I don't think I even want to spend that much on the quarterback position next year. But I would, like I said, I would go for like maybe a soft reset, but not even quite to the extent this year with how much they paid Jameis and Tyrann Mathieu. Like, I think maybe you don't do that, but we'll see.
I don't think their investment in Jameis was that over the top, though.
Not over the top.
If you feel like it's a solid player, spending that little bit, $14 million a year on a quarterback isn't really that much money. I mean, that's pretty cheap for that position. You gotta have a starter somewhere. Like, what's your other? Like, what's your?
Well,
other
that's
option?
what I'm saying is, like, Dalton costs 1/3 the price of Jameis.
Yeah, but
and that level of quarterback is cheaper.
$14 million for a chance to find out if you have somebody at that position, I think is pretty cheap. And I think if
it depends on the person. If there's a $14 million quarterback, it has to be that much better than the $5 million quarterback. And I don't know if the $14 million quarterback exists. Jameis is one of one. Jameis is the only $14 million quarterback in the league right now. That is a category that pretty much does not
But
exist.
if there was a guy out there and they spent $14 million to bring him in to get a
Sure.
look at him, see if he could do
Sure.
it. I mean, that position's just what it is. If you
Yeah.
see something that you're like, man, maybe, and it's $14 million.
Well, we
that's a
talked
cheap
about
maybe.
Jimmy Garoppolo. If Trey Lance comes back next year and Garoppolo is available, I'm not paying him $18 million. That's not how I'm approaching the quarterback. I don't want the 20th best quarterback for more than $15 million next year. I don't want that.
But yeah, I would agree. I wouldn't spend anybody that's expensive that's near the end of their career, because I don't know that your window's that wide open anymore. I think the window's probably closing on that a little bit. But I think that I would probably stand pat for the most part next year. Maybe cut off a little bit of dead weight, but I wouldn't tear it down, and I would try to add to it with younger assets. I think that, and if the quarterback thing hits, like, you still have good players. Marshawn's a good player. Pete Werner's a good player. You got two good number 2 cornerbacks. Your offensive line has McCoy, and Cesar Ruiz is a young asset. Chris Olave is a good player. So, like, I don't think it's all.
I think there's
darkness.
5 tough decisions. 6 quarterback. Both quarterbacks they have on their roster.
Yeah, agreed.
They have to decide if they're going to pay them again. Jameis is a tough decision. I think Alvin's somewhat of a tough decision, but I think he's a long-term plan, so he's probably not on the list. But Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Michael Thomas, and Marcus Davenport, who's scheduled to be a free agent. They're all decisions, Cam Jordan and Demario Davis are going to be 33. I think I'd probably want to keep both guys. They're so important to the team. They're still playing well. Michael Thomas, we've talked about, and Marcus Davenport's probably going to be the toughest.
I'd throw Andrew Speed on that list too. I think he's probably somebody that you look at a little bit.
But
if you decide to keep Cam and
Tyrann Mathieu would be on that list too, but like as you pointed out,
$7 million guaranteed.
It's already guaranteed.
$5 million to cut him, I think. So there's really no benefit there at all. But so if you're keeping Cam and Demario, you're kind of standing pat. Like, I kind of actually believe, like, if there is this, like, you start looking at the cap, it makes much more sense to just hold tight kind of next year. And then if you decide at that point, all right, we're going to tear it down, it's much more feasible in 24 than it is in 23.
I'm okay with keeping everyone we just said, if that's what you choose to do. Michael Thomas and Andrew Pete, I didn't mention Pete, are guys that maybe a couple guys you move on from, but I'm just not investing draft picks or significant money in a Jimmy Garoppolo type or whoever next year's Tyrann Mathieu is, and saying, and we're also going to use up some important assets to also try to be a 9-win team instead of an 8-win team. That's where I
wouldn't do that either. I wouldn't do that either. No, I would stand pat, hope for better health, see if you can get something different at quarterback, and if there's some young players to sign, sure, sign young players.
It's gonna be a moot point when the Saints finish 9-8 and go to the NFC Championship game this year.
Well, even if they make the playoffs, so I don't think my outlook for the offseason doesn't change on that. Like, I don't think that they're anywhere they need to be. If they make the playoffs, I'm not coming on here and being like, throw everything at it, because it's just not there right now. Like, I just don't think they're that close to being a Super Bowl team. However, if there is that, like, superstar type quarterback that's available somehow, that is something that I think we differ on, and we can argue about this throughout the offseason.
I won't speak for you. I didn't like the Deshaun Watson pursuit for a lot of reasons that weren't just about the player. But I don't mind if there is a player that they're like, well, this player's going to be our quarterback for the next 10 years, so we're devoting every resource we have to that quarterback. Because if that player existed, I don't even know who that player would be. I mean, Lamar Jackson, in theory.
Sure,
like, if they say, here is everything for Lamar, I don't care what happens to the other 52 players on the roster, frankly.
That's where I'm at with it. No, just if they can get that type of player without the off-field baggage, and that's that's a really good comp. I mean, Deshaun, that was I'm just glad we're not covering that story.
Yeah,
we'll just leave it there.
Exactly. That's a situation we didn't get to, but I'll take Saints over Cleveland, because I didn't want that to be the narrative of their season. But DJ did make a good point earlier when we were talking about this off air. Basically, if we feel like we're rambling a little bit on today's podcast, this is like we've recorded what Mike and Nick talk about all the time when we're not in the chair. We talk about all these things. And so I thought you guys would be interested in this. But DJ made a really good point, which is one of the things that led the Saints to go for it this year was they recognized that the rest of their division is terrible. Like, I don't think they ever said it publicly, but I know privately they felt like Atlanta's not going anywhere this year and Carolina's not going anywhere this year, and we think Tampa Bay is going to take a step back. That is one thing they got right this offseason. And that is not going to be any different next year because Carolina, Atlanta, and Tampa are all going to be predicted to win about 4 games next year, probably. So they probably will be inspired to be like, there's still a window here.
There is, yeah. I mean, the whole division's really a race to like who can get a quarterback first. Brady's probably feels like he's on his way out of Tampa Bay. I don't know. He could stay there for 10 more years too, and I wouldn't be surprised either way. But it feels like that's coming to an end. But for the other 3 teams, it really is kind of like who gets the quarterback first, and whoever does, I think, gets out of the gates a little bit ahead of everybody else. And you know, I don't know if any of them are going to find the answer next year. Maybe Carolina does with their draft pick. Man,
Atlanta's set up pretty well too. They've been collecting a lot of
Yeah.
assets. Like there's a direction there.
Yeah. But we'll argue about all this all offseason. I think that's all we got for today. We appreciate you guys checking out the show. Again, if you are not signed up for NewOrleans.Football, fix that. The link is on the screen right now, NewOrleans.Football /subscribe. And we'll have all your coverage all weekend from Pittsburgh.